Okay, hello. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon's farming discussion. I'm Annie McKee, I'm on the festival committee, and this event has run every year since the beginning of the Thailand Food and Music Festival. And the real purpose of it is that in Thailand and in the How of Kumar, we live in a farming community, but many of us have no real connection to farming. We don't actively work the land, and there's a lot that we could learn from the local farming community so that we have a better connection and a better understanding of the landscape and the food that is grown here. So I'm not going to speak much at all. I'm delighted that we've got a great panel of three young people from Thailand who now work in agricultural careers, and they're going to describe a bit about what they do, how they've ended up doing it, and also their thoughts now on the problems that we're facing during the pandemic and going forward so that we have a sustainable farming future in Thailand and the How of Kumar. And I'm delighted that we've got an excellent chairperson as well. Eddie Gillanders is a well-known face in agricultural circles in the Northeast. He edits and publishes his own magazine, Farm Northeast, and previously he worked for the Press and Journal newspaper. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Eddie. The only thing is, if you have a question for the panel, please write this question into the Facebook comments, and I'll ask the panel directly when they get to the discussion part. We're in for an interesting afternoon. Thank you, Eddie.
Well, thank you, Annie, and welcome to everyone. I must say it did strike me initially a bit odd to have a farming discussion as part of a food and music festival. The food link, of course, is pretty obvious, but when you think about it, so is the music. As much of the Northeast music heritage of corn kisters and bothy ballads stems from the days before mechanization, when most farms had a large number of horsemen, cattlemen, and ploughmen living on farms, and a large number and employed at the regular feeing markets. And they made their music with their melodeons and fiddles, often poking a snook at their employers when they decided to move on. Hence bothy ballads such as the Barnyards of Delgate and the Hash of Drumdelgi. So I congratulate Annie and the organisers for including the farming discussion in the programme of the festival. Although our three excellent young speakers, all from Thailand and committed to careers in agriculture, will be looking to the future rather than dwelling on the past in their presentations. First, a little introduction about myself as instructed by Annie. I am delighted and indeed honoured to have been asked to chair today's discussion and try and keep the discussion going. Like most people, I have a great affection for Teesside, which in my case goes back to the teenage years when I lived at Dinnet, when my stepfather was grieve at the Cleric, the home farm on the Dinnet estate, and my misspent youth at the Dinnet and Tarlin dances on a Saturday night. Hard to believe these days, but the Dinnet dance in particular was the place to be on a Saturday night in the early 1960s. Although I had to go to another Aberdeenshire dance venue popular with the farming fraternity at Logie Durno to find the girl who became my wife. I actually attended a boying academy for all of 7 days as we moved to Dinnet just before the school holidays, before going on to Bankery Academy, where I utterly failed to gain any academic distinction, so quickly looked for a job, which I was lucky to get with the Aberdeen Angus Cattle Society, whose headquarters were then in Aberdeen. It triggered a lifelong interest in the breed, which I continued after going into journalism as editor of the Society's magazine and secretary of the North East Aberdeen Angus Club, both for 40 years. I also enjoyed a close association with the Doonside Aberdeen Angus herd in its heyday in the 1960s, when the famous bull, the Cedium of Doonside, sold at the Perth Bull Sales in 1964 for 54,000 guineas, which is still the second highest price ever paid for an Aberdeen Angus by auction in the UK. Since leaving the full-time employment of the Angus Society in 1970, my career has varied between agricultural journalism and livestock marketing, including 11 years, as Annie said, as agriculture editor of the Press and Journal, and spells as marketing manager with two farming co-ops, Northeastern Farmers, sadly no longer with us, and my last 14 years before retiring with the A&M Group at Thainston. Since retiring in 2004, I've been publishing my own monthly farming magazine, Farm Northeast, and last month published our 100th issue. I don't know if you can see it or not, can you? Says he promoting his own business, sorry about that. But enough about me. The subject of today's discussion on sustainable farming post-COVID is very apposite at the present time, as farming really is at something of a crossroads as we leave the EU. Possibly without a deal on future trading arrangements with Europe, and we move away from support based on area payments to one which the government calls public money for public goods, the public goods being meeting environmental objectives. At the same time, we have the challenge of climate change and the imperative to both reduce carbon emissions and feed a world population set to grow to 9 billion by 2050. One of the big issues I'm sure we'll discuss, how do we get the right balance and support measures to protect the environment and at the same time stimulate food production? We're told that we've got to eat less meat and dairy products, but there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about Scotland's carbon footprint. Beef and sheep production in Scotland is based on grassland and land unsuitable for crops, and the Scottish Government has ambitious targets for increased forestry. Both grass and trees act as carbon sinks, and it's not like Brazil, where huge areas of forest are being cleared to accommodate beef production. And finally, the most immediate conundrum, will COVID result in the public moving more to food produced in their own local area, rather than being imported from all over the world? The early days of lockdown showed how vulnerable we could be to food shortages, with supermarket shelves emptying so quickly, and I see Morrison's are only this week limiting sales of a few food products. So on with the discussion. Our three speakers are going to give a short presentation of their experience and views on areas of interest before we open up for a question and answer session. So I hope you have your questions ready. Apologies to Jenna that I received a few notes from her to introduce her, but I had already written them from my own knowledge, so I'm sorry I haven't had time to study your notes properly. Anyway, Dr. Jenna Ross is our first speaker, and like the other two speakers, needs no introduction to a talented audience. Jenna was brought up on the family farm of Craskins, and since graduating from Aberdeen University in 2009 with a PhD in forensic science, has become a recognised world expert on slugs and snails. Now, that may not sound the sexiest of scientific pursuits, but slugs and snails cause huge damage to crops all over the world, and Gemma has travelled around the world in her search for a biological solution to controlling these pests. But as she will tell you, her scientific interests and work covers a much wider area than slugs and snails, and was recognised last year by the Royal Northern Agricultural Society with their Under 35 award for her outstanding contribution in her role as the International Business Development Manager with the CHAP Solutions, if that's the correct pronunciation of it. So Jenna, it's over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Eddie. Let me just pull up my presentation. Okay, thank you very much, Eddie, and thank you very much to the Tarland Food and Music Festival for inviting me to speak today. So for those of you that don't know me, I grew up at Craskins Farm, as Eddie's already mentioned, which is really epitomised by Queen's View. The farm is currently managed by my parents and my brother, who are third and fourth generation farmers or custodians of this land. And our family link to the land started with my great-grandfather who took on the tenancy from the McRoberts Trust at Woodfield, and then that expanded to Kraskens, and then more recently, Pets Farm. And without a doubt, this landscape inspired my career. I'd always had an interest in agriculture and an interest in science. And for the longest time, I was looking at how I could combine those two. And eventually that led to studying agricultural pests, especially slugs. So many people ask me, why slugs? Well, slugs are one of the number one agricultural and horticultural pests in the UK. And with that, they bring huge challenges to a variety of different crop types and control strategies. And during my PhD studies at the University of Aberdeen, that focused on how we can potentially replace this idea of conventional slug control with the idea of biological control. So using one living organism to control another living organism. And it also opened up opportunities for travel for me. I got the opportunity to study in the US and South Africa. And then following my studies, I went on to work abroad, initially in Norway, and then settling in South Africa for many years. I set up my own research group looking at the future of slug control, and also did a sabbatical in Tanzania. But for me, it was always important about how I could bring my experiences home and back down to Thailand. And with that, I took on the hobby of writing for the Deeside Piper, speaking about my career journey, about my work, my research, and just my life experiences of living internationally. In 2018, I got the life-changing opportunity to travel the world as a Nuffield farming scholar. And for those of you that don't know about Nuffield farming, it's the opportunity to focus in on a specific area of agriculture. It's an opportunity to travel, but it's also about fostering the next generation of agricultural leaders. And with that, I got the opportunity to spend 26 weeks in 2018 traveling the world looking at future slug control. I looked at slug invasions, their impact, control systems, how we monitor slugs, and the future of malacology, which is the study of slugs and snails and how we get new entrants into the subject area. I also looked at how to set up citizen science projects and set up one in Kenya and one in Canada. I got the opportunity to visit some amazing places and had so many amazing experiences along the way, whether it's the Rockies, the Sydney Opera House, Tokyo, right down to milking cows by hand in Kenya. It also opened up many doors for me. I got the chance to visit Westminster many times. I got the chance to speak at the US Department of Agriculture at Capitol Hill in DC. And then, if I scroll back, and then last year, I got the opportunity to attend the Committee on World Food Security at the FAO in Rome, which was very poignant considering where we are right now with COVID and food security. My Nuffield scholarship also planted a seed in me with regards to wanting to do more, not just for the industry, but also for society. I took on the role last year of Secretary and Treasurer for Nuffield Scotland, and I'll be taking on the role of Chair next year. And part of that is about promoting this amazing opportunity to other young people in agriculture across Scotland. And with that, we held an event last year at the Scottish Parliament. I'm also passionate about education and the next generation. I've already mentioned setting up citizen science projects, but for me, it's also about engaging with the next generation, not only about showcasing where our food actually comes from, but also demonstrating the breadth of career opportunities in agriculture and the skill set that we're going to need in the future to feed people, whether that's plant and animal science through to robotics and machine learning. And with that, it inspired me to take on a role with the new Government Agritech Centre, Crop Health and Protection, or CHAP as it's known. CHAP obviously means something else if you're from Deeside, but this is focused on agriculture. And it's one of 4 UK agritech centres that have been set up as a nexus between UK government, academia and industry to help drive efficiency and resilience and wealth right across the agri-food sector. And it really is about this catalyst of change. And we as CHAP, we're made up of a national network of industry partners and research institutes. And we include 4 non-delivery partners, including Bayer Crop Science, ADAS, Tesco and Frontier, who really represent industry, as well as 12 delivery partners, which each delivery partner, they're academic institutes, it's universities, and we had investment into new capabilities and really game-changing world-class facilities spanning crop protection, soil health, controlled environmental agriculture, and digital solutions. I thought what I would do is speak about, we've got so many capabilities, I'm going to speak about one capability per each of those areas, just to kind of showcase what we're doing and also showcase how some of them have brought me back to the farm. So with regards to data diagnostics, one of these is a new digital support tool called Crop Monitor Pro. And this has been designed for UK farmers around forecasting and decision support. It's about looking at the risk posed by pests and diseases and looking at the need to spray and when to spray. So it involves a module that shows which days over the next 14 days are the most suitable farmers, weather-wise, to apply their spray treatments. And it's based on hourly met data on a 2x2 kilometre grid. And so far it's been focused for winter wheat, oilseed rape and potatoes in the UK. And it's currently going through a validation phase with the aim of making it commercially available for the next cropping cycle. One of the other areas we're involved with is soil health, and that's with our links with Cranfield. And it's about improving our understanding of soil management to improve soil health. And that's about pulling together soil, crop and water research. It's about removing the weather elements so we can really get to grips with what's going on. And it's also, for our side, looking at the phenotyping, so what's physically going on at both above and below ground. And to showcase this, I thought I would show a really short video. One of the other areas that we focus on is around this idea of controlled environmental agriculture and vertical farming, which is really this idea of growing crops vertically, so you're really utilising your space, but under controlled conditions, so controlling temperature, relative humidity and carbon dioxide, for example, and relying on lighting systems, so indoor farming using LED lighting and recirculating hydroponics and controlling light waves and looking at how we can use that to improve food production. A good example of this is our Innovation Hub for Controlled Environmental Agriculture that was set up last year at the James Hutton Institute in Dundee. It's a collaboration between ourselves, James Hutton and Liberty Produce, which are an SME. And it's really about showcasing as a demonstrator how controlled environmental agriculture can work. So it's about testing new technologies with lighting. It might be looking at things such as nanobubbles and how we can deliver nutrients more efficiently to the plants, and also looking at different hydroponic systems. Also how we can reduce power that goes into this, the cost and the overall reducing light wastage. And the last area I want to speak about was this idea of crop monitoring and protection. And this, and for us, this is looking at fine phenotyping or imaging. And we use a video meter, which is that piece of equipment on the right-hand side, and it looks at beyond a normal camera. So a normal camera looks at red, green and blue light, we call it an RGB. And with this, we look beyond that. We look at 19 different wavelengths from UV through to near infrared and fluorescence. And this helps us to distinguish and quantify features not seen with the naked eye, which you can see here from that strawberry. So it produces a unique spectral signature for pests and diseases that can then translate into the field using portable cameras. And a great example of a project which has been born from my Nuffield Farming Scholarship is this idea of SlugBot, which is a feasibility study to develop an innovative game-changing technology for autonomous slug monitoring. So here we're using robots to go out and actually monitor slugs and the numbers, and then precision treatment. So then using that data to apply biologicals in a precision way. And this is working with some really cutting edge, state-of-the-art companies, including a small robot company in Cosmonio, as well as working alongside farmers. And this project, it launched during COVID, which opened up many challenges in itself. So part of that was about, while home in the farm, how can we do part of that research in the farm? So we started doing slug collections here at Craskins. and then sending those slugs off for multispectral imaging, which you can see in the image on the right there, and then looking at the artificial intelligence element of this research. And our next phase is about scaling that up. It's about applying that knowledge to the robot. So a small robot company have a fleet of 3 robots called Tom, Dick and Harry. So this particular bit of knowledge will be applied to Tom, and he will be going out to scout for slugs in the field. And then the final phase is around how he uses that knowledge to then precision spray, which is, for us, could be game changing, because I mentioned earlier, my background is in biologicals, and biologicals are extremely expensive. And right now they're very much targeted towards higher value crops. But if you could turn that around and be able to apply these products in a really precise way rather than blanket covering the field, we may well make this financially feasible for broadacre crops and oilseed rape, which would be really game changing. And then impact of COVID. Well, for me, I've already mentioned the launches of projects such as SlugBot during this time, and how we're reworking some of that work package. It has had a massive impact. But ironically, we are busier now more than ever because people are speaking about food. They're speaking about where their food is coming from. But from a personal perspective, it's also got me involved in new educational and extension activities, such as the Lockdown Learning Campaign, which is run by NFU Education and Eat Farm Now. And this is about inspiring children while learning from home about where their food is coming from, about farming and about the countryside. And myself and my colleagues, we generated 75 activities and resources for children, covering ag tech, wildlife, horticulture, slugs. And with that, we've had 30,000 users utilize this site and 77,000 page views since it was established. So it's been great. And what's been even more beneficial is since the children have been back at school, I've been speaking to local teachers and they've actually been utilizing this resource within their classrooms, which is amazing. I've also become more involved. One of the things that was mentioned earlier is my involvement with other initiatives such as a STEM ambassador and also Lantra Scotland. And with that, I've been involved with campaigns such as No Wrong Path, which was launched around the time that the exam results went out. And it was really about showcasing that no matter what your results, there is no wrong path, whether that's going on to higher education, university, college, or doing an apprenticeship within agriculture. And finally, that COVID. So as I mentioned earlier, it's really highlighted the importance of food and food security and supply chains. And I'm looking forward to the discussion later on with Gavin and Megan about that and about the impact it's had locally and also locally in labour as well. And finally, I just want to say thank you, and thank you to the Tarleton Food and Music Festival for inviting me to speak. And if anyone's interested to learn more about anything that I've covered today, then please get in contact and my email address is there. Thank you.
Jenna, thank you very much indeed. That's been a fascinating presentation, and you obviously lead a very busy life with all the various scientific interests you have there. I won't take any questions at the moment, but we'll move on straight on to the next speaker and take all the questions at the end. So our next speaker is Gavin Robertson, who's 22 years old and from the farming family, and as you will all know, in Coole, Tarleton. He graduated from Newcastle University with a degree in agriculture last summer, and after a year working on the farm at home, has now started as a ruminant nutritionist in Lanarkshire. So Gavin, can I invite you to make your presentation, please?
I can't seem to get my video to work, so I'll maybe make it quite brief. I assume you can hear me, can you?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, right, okay. I'll just have to speak it, but I'll start with it wasn't much of my presentation. It wasn't very fancy anyway. Right. So I was asked to speak a little bit about my education so far, and from a practical point of view, I've had a farming education since the moment I could walk, and this has continued on to working in holidays. And then after university, as you heard, I worked full-time on the family farm for almost a year. From an academic point of view, I've always been interested in farming, and that's led me to choosing to study agriculture at Newcastle University. I graduated in 2019 with honours in animal production science, although the degree also covered the basics in most aspects of farming, including soil science, agronomy, business management, and agricultural economics. to name a few. Fast forward to a few months ago, and I started working as a ruminant nutritionist at a feed company in central Scotland. It's called Ellis Smiley and Sons. Here I've been intensively studying many aspects of ruminant nutrition with a particular focus on optimising dairy cow rations. And I feel that this has been a good mixture of both the academic side of things and some of the practical farming sort of things that I've been interested in my whole life. Annie's asked me to briefly talk about my views and vision for sustainable farming. I would say that's a very difficult ask in 5 minutes or so, but I'll give it a go. What I will explain is the two most important things that I've learned about sustainable farming and how that shaped my vision for the future. The first most important thing I believe with sustainable farming is the importance of soil. Obviously, soil supports growth for almost everything we consume. However, it's the amount of carbon stored in the soil is what is quite amazing to me. There's more carbon in the first 2 meters of soil, although there's not always 2 meters of soil in this area, than in all the biomass and the atmosphere combined. So this includes all the carbon stored in trees and obviously carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and that. And really highlights the importance of soil in the carbon cycle. A group of European scientists in 2015 estimated that an increase in soil carbon content of just 0.4% in the first 30 centimetres, so about a foot of soil, would offset almost all emissions for that year. This obviously isn't an aim that we can just increase soil carbon and forget about all the other emissions, but it was something to really highlight the importance of soil carbon. This was the beginning of the 4 per 1,000 initiative set up as between many European countries, and I'd urge you to look it up and see what they have to say. My second sort of big important thing that I've learned about sustainable farming, and Eddie Glanders mentioned it slightly, was the sort of the importance of ruminant livestock as acting as a carbon sink. So if we include soil carbon, very quickly we realise that the methane emission from British cattle and sheep is not contributing to climate change, especially in the last 30 to 40 years, as numbers have been declining. They are part of a cycle. So methane emitted by ruminants is broken down in 10 to 12 years in the atmosphere. It's broken down into CO2 and water. This is then used by grass. The CO2 and water is used by grass and is then to grow. And this growth is eaten by the ruminants, which again, a certain proportion of that carbon is emitted as methane. As long as we don't increase methane emissions and numbers of cattle and sheep, the cycle is quite stable. Grazing grass can also help increase soil carbon content through the root growth and the lack of sort of tillage and stuff that can degrade soils. This is especially important when integrated with cropping systems, particularly the cropping systems in Scotland that are based on quite heavy cultivation and ploughing, which can lose carbon into the atmosphere. In short, I believe that the key to sustainable farming is the protection of our soils and the building of soil carbon reserves through strategic use of ruminants, better crop rotation, and general integration of soil boosting / preserving practices across the whole industry. Although this is also must include minimising fossil fuel usage, as there's no point storing carbon in soil and releasing it from carbon reserves under the North Sea. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Gavin. That's some very relevant points there, which I'm sure will come up in discussion later. So we'll now move on to our third speaker, Megan Albon. Albon. Have I pronounced that correctly? Sorry, Megan. Megan Albon, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Megan grew up in Aboyne and attended the Aboyne Academy. She studied geography at the University of Cambridge, where she was particularly interested in issues relating to the global food system. Since graduating in 2014, she's returned home and worked for a number of direct sale organic food producers, including Work Farm and Huntley Herbs. And in 2018, started her own business, a market garden and local veg box scheme, which she runs with the help of her dad, Steve, from a small farm in the Thailand area. Megan, can I ask you to make your presentation?
Great, yeah, I will, and I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see if this is going to work. Oh, okay, right. Oh, is that going to work? Are we seeing is that now a slide? Nope. No?
Not quite yet, Megan.
Oh, there we go. That's a slide. How's that?
That's it.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, I wasn't expecting it to work. It is working, isn't it? Annie?
Well, we see.
Yes, it's working.
Great, okay. Thank you very much for asking me to speak today. I'm actually quite flattered to be included in the farming community in Thailand. To be honest, I think that might be a point for debate. I'm sort of more on the, well, it depends in which direction farming goes, but I'm sort of on that dividing line between market gardening, small scale direct sale food production and farming. So I have an 1.5 acre tenancy from the McRobert Trust Estate on the fantastic soil of the Howe of Cremar. I have a market garden where I grow there about 30 different types of vegetables. And every week I deliver to almost 40 families in the local area. So on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday, those households will receive, depending on the delivery day, a box of vegetables, enough for a family of 2 or a family of 4. So at the moment, I'm at about 40 veg boxes a week. This is my first year on that site, so I'm hoping that next year I can double that. The site, I think, could probably provide up to 100 families with veg every week. Maybe not for the whole year, but maybe for half the year or up to 9 months. So the business model is quite different from that of conventional farms, which are much bigger, and there are pros and cons to it. The big advantage of it is that you're selling directly to the customers, so none of that value is leaking into the supermarket chain. And in the current farming system, that sort of cut that the supermarkets take can be up to sort of 80% of the value of the food. Which is huge. And so by capturing that value through direct sale, and also through having particularly low overhead, like a lot of the work is very physical and doesn't involve, particularly expensive technology, it is possible to make a decent income from selling high value crops, which are freshly picked and delivered on the same day. So I think particularly with vegetables, that is a model which can provide an income. I'm not from a farming family, but I studied geography at the University of Cambridge, and I was really interested in sustainable food systems and all of the problems within our food system and the inequalities within that of developing countries selling their produce to richer nations at the expense of their own food security. I decided academia wasn't for me, and I was really inspired by the hands-on work that I was able to get working on for local small-scale food producers. And I think what was really interesting in that is just how much employment can be created on a relatively small area through diversification. So for example, when I was working at Work Farm, it's a 200-acre sheep farm with a butchery on site. So I was doing some sheep work, quite a lot of butchery, some delivery driving, but you're bringing all of that value back into the local economy, and that creates many more jobs than could be supported through an undiversified operation. I've worked in a variety of direct sale food producers, including a chutney and preserve making business up in Huntley, and worked in various different gardening jobs, really learning about the cultivation of plants. And and since 2018, I've been running a market garden. My original market garden was in Inch, and I've since moved to Tarland. I think that small-scale agriculture has a really important role within the landscape. It's not that common up here, but there are parts of the country where there is a really competitive market for in local veg boxes. Every local veg box scheme around here, there's one in Lunfannon, there's one at Rhynie, have huge waiting lists, and I've got a waiting list at the end of just my first year. So there's definitely demand there, and I think that finding a way to encourage more of these operations will make our local food supply more diversified and more kind of resilient, as well as creating employment and creating an accessible option for new entrants. Because as somebody not from a farming family, and this is an issue which affects even the children of farmers, finding employment in your local community can be really, really difficult, and having access to land. So I think this is a really important option. I haven't gone through my slides at all, but I grew a variety of crops. So you'll see there's a brassicas in this quarter. This is all legumes, so the broad beans did really well. This was earlier in the year. This is all these photos of kind of from spring. This is salad and courgettes. The courgettes were actually really good. They've just started getting the frost, but they've been really strong. And this is the carrot section. I've got nets on them. And that's a slightly blurry picture of a veg box. So I'm tending to put sort of like 7, 8 different items in there every week. So that's me. I'll stop sharing my screen now. There we go.
Okay, Megan, thank you very much indeed, and well done with what you've achieved so far, and all the best for the future expansion of your business, and particularly dealing directly with between farm and customer, which is great. If you deliver as far as Demoke, you might even hear from me. Anyway, thank you to all three for the presentations. They've been fascinating. I'm sure they've generated heaps of questions. And I think Annie has the first question.
Hi, thanks everybody. That's been really great to hear your various different backgrounds and quite a wide range of topics to talk about already. We've got a question from Gillian Needham, who is in Thailand, and she asks the panel, what would be your vision for what will be grown in the How of Cromer in 2045? What is each speaker's vision for what will be growing in the How by 2045? So Eddie, I'll leave it with you to guide the discussion.
Well, what a question. Well, we keep the order and the same as before for this question anyway, and invite Gemma to have a go at that one.
That's a good question. Starting off nice and easy there. I think the most important thing overall, and I think this is something that we're seeing time and time again, is you look at any other industry and it's about what the demand is. I think that with the way that the payment scheme has been in the past, it hasn't always been about demand focused. And I think with that, we're going to see a lot more focus on demand as we leave Europe and as we reconstruct how payments are going to be made to farmers. We're likely going to see a move from where we are right now, to be fair. And I think with that, we're going to see a lot more environmental schemes folded into that. But I think there's always going to be we look at what's in the fields right now. I think we're always going to see that demand for barley. Our drinks industry in Scotland is an extremely strong industry on a global level. And I think that's going to be helping us, especially post-Brexit, and keeping us competitive globally. And I think we move to, in the past, we've been really reliant on quite processed foods. I think what we're seeing now is we're taking a step back from high calorie foods, and we're speaking about more nutritious foods. So I expect to see a lot more focus on what foods are going to reward us with the highest level of nutrition.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Can I perhaps just follow up before I put the question to the other speakers? It's something you said in your presentation. Do you see vertical farming taking off?
I think that vertical farming is going to be very topical, more likely in urban regions where space is an issue. I'm sure we've all heard about certain spaces being utilised. In London, you hear of growing underground or using underground areas that are redundant and not used for anything else. So I think that vertical farming plays a really great role and opportunity in areas where you do have land use issues. I think that's probably less of an issue where we actually have land, but we might see our land being used in a different way. Especially when we start thinking about carbon, etc. But certainly the vertical farm space, I think, is more, right now as it stands, more of an urban opportunity.
Thank you, Jenna. Gavin, farming in 2045, what do you think?
Well, what we see at the moment is mainly sort of spring barley, some wheat, but a lot of cattle and sheep sort of grazing ground. And I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think grass really has a huge role to play in the future of farming, maintaining soil fertility. So I think we'll still see that. Spring barley wise, we might see a little bit less growing for animal feed as we push towards a more grass-fed animal, but still maintaining that demand for malt. Legumes, I would think, would come in a much bigger way. So that's your clovers and stuff like that, and current breeding with red clover is making it more and more persistent and more useful, basically, as a source, and this would reduce our nitrogen inputs and synthetic fertilizers, which I would expect to be subsidized or promoted anyway. But I don't see anything moving too quickly. If the climate continues to get warmer here, and I think we're meant to get sort of more extreme weather and stuff, we might see an increase in winter wheat and things that we're maybe pushing. The growing season maybe isn't quite long enough at the moment to grow, so we might see some more of those sort of plants that are growing in southern regions moving up into the northeast and into the How. Well, that's all, I think.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Just as a matter of interest, do you see climate change perhaps helping farming in areas like the northeast?
The unsettled nature of the weather does make it difficult to manage. I think lots of predictions suggest we're going to have more of these extremes where we have very wet or very dry years. However, most predictions actually have Scotland, certainly from a plant growing point of view, benefiting from climate change, as there's more carbon in the atmosphere, which helps with photosynthesis on the plants growing here, and also warmer climates generally, which will increase the growing season.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. So we're not going to have a harvest every year like this year, unfortunately, by what you say.
No.
Now, sorry, come in. Yeah.
No, I was just agreeing.
No, okay. Rio, Megan, if I can now put the question to you, did you see any likelihood of farming returning to smaller farms like you're doing and away from the big industrial farms that we've got these days?
I don't. I think that at the moment, most of our vegetables are coming from Spain. They're coming from Holland. They're being grown on a really huge scale, but there are other problems with that as well. Vegetables are very perishable. Like, they taste so much better on the day they're picked. And if we want to have them fresh in Britain, on our doorstep all year round, then we have to wrap them in a huge amount of plastic. There's other big problems with having our veg come from Spain. A lot of labour regulations there are really lax. So in many of these huge polytunnel covered areas, you've got essentially very, very low paid workers from the north of Africa working in really dire conditions, picking our vegetables for us, the tomatoes that we see on the shelves in December. And I think there are huge problems with that. So I don't know enough about livestock farming really to comment in the same way that Gavin and Jenna can about that. But I think certainly with our vegetable production, there are big issues, both kind of logistically and politically, in terms of Brexit, with all of our veg coming from Spain, but also ethically. And I think that market gardens have a really important role to play in producing vegetables in Britain. And actually, like, there is a huge variety of vegetables you can grow in Scotland. You know, I've been growing courgettes, cauliflowers, kale, salad. There's no reason that this stuff has to come from all over the world. You know, I was in the co-op last year and I was selling mange tout, I think, at like £5 a kilo. And it was in the co-op from Peru at the same time as I had a glut at £8 a kilo, which is completely insane. And so I hope that we will be growing more veg in Britain, because I think it would be better quality and tastier and better for us and involving less plastic. So I think that there's basically in 2045, we could easily be growing enough vegetables and a great variety of vegetables to keep everybody satisfied. And I hope that we do have a change from the current supply chains in terms of vegetables.
Thank you, Megan. A very optimistic point there. Thank you. Annie, have we another question?
Yes, we do have another question. And I'm sorry, I think I was unmuted for a moment just to confuse things. So the second question is a really big discussion. And it starts with you, Eddie. The questioner says, Eddie says, we're not like Brazil. However, Scotland was once clothed with a temperate rainforest. Trees were cleared and wetlands were drained and brought under the plough. What does the panel think about large-scale rewilding to reduce farming greenhouse gases, draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, increase soil carbon, restore biodiversity, mitigate flooding, and improve water quality? So we've only got 40 minutes, so if you can just rein it in, but this reminds me a lot of what Gavin was talking about earlier. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm glad the question is going to the panel and not back to me. Right, can we go to Gavin first to have a go at that one?
I can give it a go. To start with, I would say if we rewild in the sense that we wouldn't have any food production from there, and then imported all our food, are we really making a positive difference to the overall climate? I would also, would we want to put our food security at risk by importing more food because we're growing less? I would also say that reducing greenhouse gases, drawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, increasing soil carbon, and mitigating flooding and improving water quality could all be done with the integration of grass systems with cropping systems, you know, because as I mentioned, using grazed grass, we can draw carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, store it in the soil by increasing the soil carbon. And this would increase the water holding capacity of the soil and possibly mitigate some flooding. So it's mainly, my point is that I think large scale rewilding would be dangerous from a food security point of view and possibly wouldn't help by mitigate climate change if we're importing from other countries, and that many of the benefits mentioned about rewilding could be gained just by integrating ruminants into cropping systems a little bit better than we are currently.
Okay, thank you, Gavin, for that response to that one. On the specific point, not very sure it was made in the question, but of the suggestion recently, or the proposal recently for the importation of the likes of wolves, is that something you would be in favour of?
The what, sorry?
Wolves, isn't it? Was the latest one, I think. Someone wanted to import, a landowner up in the north.
Oh, right. No, I mean, I don't really understand what the benefit in introducing predators are, you know, that haven't been here for hundreds of thousands of years. I don't quite understand why some people seem to push for them. but I don't really know about the sort of the benefits that wolves might have. I can't come up with any.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I move on to you, Megan, for your answer to the question about rewilding?
Yeah, I think that there are issues there in terms of how ethical it is, as Gavin was saying, to then import all of our food. I've got a friend who is involved in a nature reserve near Cambridge, and they've been able to create a natural wetland, a fenland that stretches for about, I think it's like 1,000 acres north of Cambridge. And it's fantastic. They've been able to buy up all this land and rewild it, and it's really benefited the biodiversity. But the reason that land is available is because farmers in East Anglia can sell 100 acres and buy 1,000 acres in Estonia. So they're breaking land in Estonia and farming it much more intensively in a country with fewer regulations so that they can rewild here. And I think that's really dangerous. And I also think that it's there are components of a rewilded landscape, like having more trees, which could be integrated into our current farming landscape. So I don't know if it would work climatically here, but in the US, they're doing big trials with chestnuts because chestnuts produce a good source of protein and could be integrated into, say, sheep production if you've got permanent pasture and you've got various different livestock grazing under them. I'm sure that Gavin would know more about the kind of like how that system would work, but I think that we can be clever in designing edible landscapes, so food producing landscapes that employ people and have multiple benefits, not just the biodiversity benefit.
Thank you, Megan. Jenna, what's your view on this one?
Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry, I think I'm having internet issues. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jenna. Thank you.
Great. I think I would have to agree with much of what Gavin and Megan have said. I think that COVID has highlighted the importance of food security. And I think, right now in the UK, we are 50 to 60% self-sufficient. If we do move to schemes where we are massively, we're rewilding massive areas of land, there is the challenge of how are we going to feed ourselves and are we going to be reliant on imports? And like Gavin said, then you're just mitigating everything, all the good you're doing anyway. You're exporting that carbon issue. So I think there's a focus on that balance of making sure that we're bringing back environmental benefits and thinking about the sustainability of our landscape. And hence where the topic of public money for public goods comes in. We will be seeing more focus on our environment, more focus on water quality, more focus on air quality as part of that. And going back to how farmers will be paid in the future, they will be rewarded based on that rather than the amount of land they're farming based on the CAP scheme. So we'll see massive benefits come from these new schemes, I'm sure. But I think at the heart of this, we've got to think about where's our food going to be coming from.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. I don't know if it's changed. We don't seem to be hearing you so well. Is that only me, or is it everyone else?
Yeah, no, I think, Jenna, you're a little bit crunchy, but we can hear you, and you made your point clearly.
Okay, I'll just try and see if I can fix my internet in between times.
Okay, we're all suffering the same problem, stuck out with bad rural broadband. Eddie, there's one more question if you wanted me to lead on with that. Just put my camera on. Yeah, it's from someone called Daniel Robertson. I've never heard of him before, but he might be related to another Robertson that's in the panel. And Daniel asks, how do we get the consumers to care more about locally produced food? It's far superior in terms of quality and climate responsibility, but the average consumer doesn't seem to care where their food comes from. So maybe the panel has some thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think we're starting with Megan this time, and I think it's an appropriate one for you, Megan, in view of what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think that in terms of veg, my experience has been that there is no shortage of demand for local veg, and actually the issue is more supply. And I think that's because there aren't a lot of opportunities in terms of finding small pockets of land where you can build up a kind of intensive veg production business. And so there's lots of people who really want a weekly veg box who can't have one. Like I've only been operating, selling veg boxes for 3 months now, and I've already got a waiting list, and I'm only serving Tarland and a Boyne. Like the demand is really there in terms of local veg. And I think a lot of people have been reading about the various issues in terms of farming practices in other countries, and they are worried, and they do want to buy local food. So I think that I'm not personally experiencing that there is a problem in terms of people worrying about where their food comes from. I think it might be more difficult in terms of other foodstuffs, maybe with meat, and I'm not sure about that, but I'll let the other panelists comment more on that.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Is Jenna there? She's not on the screen.
Can you hear me? I've turned my video off in the hope that that might help my internet.
Okay.
That sounds good, Jenna.
Okay, I think that's maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, that sounds all right again. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you heard everything, Jenna, or not, but you want to pick up this question?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, COVID has got us all thinking about where our food is coming from and that level of self-sufficiency. And I think during COVID, we did see consumers thinking locally. And the piece that we really need to work on is how we maintain that, how we keep that local link of consumers to local food production, because unfortunately people do have a short memory. We all have a short memory of things happening. So I think we've all got a role to play in that as the agricultural community, and how we keep that level of engagement, how we keep that link to the local community, and make sure that, because there's massive benefits of buying local. We've mentioned earlier, just the carbon benefits, knowing where your food is coming from, knowing the farm, having that traceability of where that produce came from, whether it's from Megan's fresh produce that she's producing or meat from your local farm. And there's so many local amazing producers. And it's been great to see during COVID that people are returning to butchers and are returning to the local shop, because without that, we will lose our local community again. I feel like as I've grown up, we went through these waves where we shopped locally. Then over the last few years, we went and shopped through supermarkets. And then with COVID, it's really brought us back to being local and really focusing on our community. And I think we've got a bit to do, both from the farming side and also the community side, to make sure that we keep that link going, that we keep that connection going, because consumers have become more connected with the countryside. We are seeing more people coming out, walking out in the countryside, really using the countryside more now than ever. So I think keeping that link from our side, from their side, will benefit massively. And one of the things that we've tried to do on our farm is to try and link that back. We were thinking actually during this time, how do you do that? And some of you might have seen our bale art at the side of the road with our bailey. And part of that was that connection, trying to show our connection, trying to link us as farmers to them. And one of the things we've been speaking about going forward is, how can we make that link stronger? So thinking about things like open farm Sundays, getting people on a farm, hopefully a post-COVID world where people can actually see and learn more about where their food is coming from. And it really brings me back to what I was speaking about earlier and the involvement that I've had with lockdown learning, getting children at a really early age thinking about where their food is coming from, and really getting them engaged, I think is going to be key in that piece of the next generation, and having understanding of food and where it comes from.
Thank you, Jenna, for these very relevant points. If I can turn to Gavin now, you've probably discussed these points with the questioner already, privately, I would suspect. But I just wondered if you felt that part of the problem is the failure of the farming industry to promote itself properly, to promote its products properly, and perhaps to not be prepared to cooperate with each other to get the volume and the continuity which we can get from imported produce. Is that a hot potato, perhaps, Gavin?
Yeah, I think the need to make the benefits of locally produced food known, is key, and that comes from the sort of levy boards, HDV, Quality Meat Scotland, and they have their adverts and their campaigns. However, I find that mostly that's promoted in farming circles, and we find ourselves spending an awful lot of money preaching to the converted, and it's not getting out to where it needs to get out, and that's something that the supermarkets and bigger companies like that just are so good at advertising all the benefits and hiding anything. We've just never been able to compete. And just a little point was one of the biggest drivers of food choice, well, the biggest driver of food choice still in the UK is price. I don't think there's any two ways about it. I know there's huge demand for local produce, but if we're talking about a broad spectrum change to local food, it needs to be competitively priced, and whether that is tariffs placed on imported food or non-local produce, or subsidies on local produce, it needs to compete on price if we want wide-scale adoption of it, I think.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Anyone else either of the other two want to come back on anything there? Or we will move on to the next question. Okay, we'll move on. Annie, have you got something else, or?
Yeah, there's another question that's come in, and yeah, I'm just always overwhelmed with how well people are informed, and so thank you for your comments so far, panel. And this question comes from the Thailand Climate Crisis Group. So there's quite an active group in Thailand who are looking at how we can become more climate friendly and overcome the climate emergency. And their question is again about food. So this is an important topic. Do we need more food pantries for the distribution of food surpluses and to tackle local food waste? So this is thinking about food and social justice. I think this is probably quite different to what our panel usually think about in their day-to-day. So maybe you can draw on some experiences of your wider networks and your international travels, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Annie. And Jenna, yes, please, can we invite you to tackle this one?
Yeah, I think that, food waste, there's almost two ways of thinking about it. I always think about it as a pre and post farm gate. There's our role on farm in the agricultural sector of how we can reduce waste before it even leaves the food, before it even leaves the farm gate. And part of around that is around crop storage, and that's something that we, as one of our capabilities, is actually focused in, and how we can reduce the wastage from crop storage. So looking at how we can reduce sprout suppressant, for example. And with that, we put a large investment into the HDB, the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board, in order to research that. So topics of potatoes, carrots, for example. And that's one element of helping to reduce the waste. And then the other element is once it leaves the farm gate, and speaking about things like food hubs, for example, I think they're really valuable. I think we all have a role to play in that and how we can reduce wastage. I think bringing it back to the COVID point, we saw a huge amount of people stockpiling, and with that we saw a huge amount of waste during COVID. And having spent many years living across sub-Saharan Africa, it breaks my heart to see that level of waste, because we're at a worse stage than we've ever been with regards to global hunger. So I think it sits as each and every one of our responsibilities to make sure that we reduce our food wastage as much as possible. And if we have food wastage, thinking about how we're utilising that in the best possible way for the wider societal benefit.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Just a small point that comes to mind about supermarkets. I don't know if the problem is with the public or it's the other way around, but I mean, everything is sold these days in supermarkets has to be the same shape and pristine clean and all the rest of it and shining. And whereas the misshaped fruit and so forth, vegetables, are perfectly good. So is there something that could be done or should be done there?
Yeah, I think that they're consumers, and we're all guilty of this, of where we've got this expectation of the perfect potato, the perfect fruit, the perfect vegetable. And actually, we almost need to retrain ourselves on that, because just because something's misshapen doesn't mean it hasn't got the same nutritional value as something that's perfect shape. So again, I think that goes back to all of our responsibilities. And we see a lot of that misshapen fruit, vegetables, etc., rather than going into, for human consumption, we see that being reused in other ways, or going into animal feed, for example. But I think that sits to all of us to rethink that piece, because, as I mentioned, there's a huge amount of food wastage out there. And I think it's all of our responsibility to take that on board.
Thank you. Gavin, can I come to this one now? To you?
I think Megan will probably have more to say on this than I do. I can't really comment on sort of the distribution of food surpluses and that in the local community, because I don't have much knowledge on the subject. I would add to your misshapen veg and stuff, it also helps contribute to the sustainability of some ruminant systems, obviously, because they're able to use this food. And I've actually got a cattle finishing business that's based down in Lanarkshire, that's based near a potato processing plant, and this plant produces mashed potato, and obviously as a byproduct of this, they have all the potato peelings and stuff like that, and that's maybe, obviously it's used as animal feed there, but that's another form of waste that we maybe forget about, is that these pre-peeled carrots or potatoes and stuff that's being processed, there's an awful lot of waste there too.
Thank you, Gavin. Mega, you're dealing directly with the public now. What's your view on this?
I think that if we are going to have more local food shortages, if we have COVID pandemics and panic buying and empty supermarket shelves and mass unemployment, there might well be more people who need food banks, and it seems like a really sensible partnership. If you've got all this food that's going to waste and you've got people who can't afford their weekly shopping bill, then it would be wrong for that food not to be distributed among them. And if we are going in the direction of more people needing that service, then for a local group to set up a food pantry where people can go without shame and collect food for free, then I think that's really important. However, I do think that whilst there is an imperative not to waste food, that also doesn't necessarily mean that we have to eat it instead of buying food from local shops, local producers. And I think there's a danger that if you do have a shop supplying free food, then that might upset the local economy, and the local grocers and food producers like myself might find it more difficult to persuade people to buy food if they can get it free somewhere else. So I think you have to be quite careful, and I would rather buy fresh, good quality food and support a local business than pick up a free, slightly stale bag of croissants that was otherwise going to be binned, So I think it's a bit of a danger. I do think that really we should be looking at the root causes of this food waste and why there are these kind of hiccups in the supply chain, which mean that whole pallets of mushrooms and bread and chicken can end up being wasted because there's a misprint on the label, or they're the end of a line, and I think that we have a huge imperative to iron those things out, because you can't, on the one hand, push for really intensive agriculture and say, well, we can't afford to have hedges. We can't afford to give up areas of land for conservation because we have to produce food. And we need to produce more and more food, whilst at the same time wasting that food. So I think if the more efficient we can make our food system, the more land we'll be able to give up for the biodiversity, which is an important part of that food system. But one small point to finish on, when I was working at Walk Farm, we used to get pheasants in at Christmas time, and the pheasants were worth 2p a bird. And if we didn't go and pick them up from the game larder, they would have just been put in a hole. Okay, and I think that there is a really kind of hidden food waste, which is really grotesque, which goes on in this country. And I'm not against shooting, but if you have a system where these, like, if you open up the crops of these birds, they're full of grain that could easily have fed cattle, could easily have fed people. And yet the shooting industry feeds these birds, rears them, releases them, shoots them, and then chucks them in a hole. And that's completely unacceptable. And I think it's really sad that that food supply chain isn't better joined up. So we have butcheries around rural areas so that meat, that grouse, pheasant, venison, is all used and is edible. It's not full of shot. It's not blown to bits. It's not broken. Because I think that's the real crime, actually, that side of food waste.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Some good points there. I have a question, unless you want to carry on, Annie.
No, please carry on, Eddie. That would be great to hear from you.
It's just to take the discussion maybe in a slightly different direction just for a minute. I think there's a lot of young people out there desperate to get a start in farming, and it seems to be just about impossible at the present time because none of the landowners are, for political reasons, I think, mostly, are not prepared to offer farms for rent. And of course, the capital cost of starting in farming, even as a tenant farmer, is pretty horrific. So have the panel any thoughts on how it could be made easier for younger farmers to get a start, to get onto the first rung of the farming ladder? And I think, can I put that one to you, Gavin, please?
Yes, Gavin? I think, yes, sorry, I'm here now, I think. It's very difficult for people to get into farming now, and this is possibly could be a future objective with subsidies and stuff like that. I know that in the past we've had quite there's been quite big grants, you know, for startup schemes and small farmer sort of grants to get them sort of off the ground. But I can't think of a way of really making it easier, you know, without just giving somebody a farm. You know, it's going to be very difficult to have the capital to get to a scale where, you know, you have a profitable business. However, that's maybe using old sort of thinking where you assume that you'll set up a farm that has cattle and sheep and grows crops, as I think Megan has shown that you can actually, you know, start from very little amount of ground and create something that could sustain you. And maybe that's the future for people that want to enter farming, is, you know, more intensive sort of veg production or something along those lines. And then from that, building your land mass and your size and scale until you can do, you know, whatever you want with it.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Megan, can I put this one to you? The short-term tenancies that were set up a few years ago, the idea was that it would be a stepping stone to allow young farmers to make a start, then to move up to a bigger farm. Do you think you can build a business on the acres you've got that can be really viable long-term, or do you see it as a stepping stone to something bigger?
I think that, so if I'm selling a veg box for £10 a week for a family of two, or two adults, and I'm selling, I can't exactly remember my maths here, but basically say I'm selling 70 a week, and I'm selling them for 6 months of the year, I'm making between 15 and 20k on veg box sales. And my input costs are very low rent, seed compost, seeds, and then I've got to pay back the upfront investment, which was the polytunnel, various tools, the shipping container. But they're really, really low inputs. And actually, because you don't have to share that value with a third party, with a supermarket, you don't have to sell at wholesale price. You can sell at retail price, which can be double. Then actually you can start to make an income which is not insignificant. Like at the moment, I'm selling veg and I'm working part-time 2 days a week in another job. And whilst I build the business up. But like, it depends how much money you want to make. Personally, for me, if I could build the business up to the point where I could have an income of £20,000 a year off of my 1.5 acres with my low input costs, you know, that's fine. And I don't particularly want to take on more land. That's not an aspiration for me. For me, it's more about finding a work-life balance where I'm not sending emails to customers at 12 o'clock at night. Not that I do that too much. I'm not sort of stressed. I'm able to have a good lifestyle. And I think that the benefit of a small scale business such as mine is that I know I spend most of the day outside. I'm doing something practical with my dad and with my dog. And I think that actually, you know, it's not going to, like, I'm not going to be kind of sitting on a vast pension when I retire, but it's a great lifestyle. It's very meaningful. It's very healthy. And I enjoy it, and it makes me enough to live on. So I think it just depends what your aspiration is. But I think that particularly vegetables, salad production, there's quite a lot of young people now going into broiler production, so producing meat birds intensively, eggs. Like, there are ways of, and particularly if you can integrate these and maybe produce, say, vegetables and eggs. I'd like to move into eggs as well. Like, there are a myriad of permutations, and maybe if you have a glamping pod on site as well, you know, you can make still more money from that. So I think that like, part of the reason I've gone down this route is that I did not see a viable career in agriculture. You know, if I wanted to do something which was practical on the ground, I would just be paid £7 an hour or whatever, like £10 an hour for the rest of my life. And this is a way of having my own business and doing something meaningful. Yeah, so I think that I think that it's a good life, and it's a viable route for people that want to have a non-office based job, basically.
Okay, thank you. So really what you're saying is there's more to life than money if you enjoy what you're doing.
Exactly.
Jenna, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I think that new entrants, it's tough, and I hope that any new payment scheme continues to support new entrants into agriculture, because it is important. But I think we're likely to see different business models. I think for new entrants, it's likely to move away from that traditional family business model and may well be looking at things like JVs, joint ventures instead. So I think that for it to work for new entrants, I think we are going to see changes in business models. I think there's lots of challenges. I think the short-term tenancies, yes, they can get as a stepping stone, but they can also be a massive challenge. And short-term tenancies, you know, 5 years and under, it can be tough. And I think that going back to that whole how we'll potentially be paid in the future, how farmers will be potentially paid in the future, short-term tenancies may well be a massive challenge for them if it's around carbon sequestration, because it doesn't give them long enough to show the benefits. So I think we might see perhaps a change in how we think of that. If we look at like the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster, they're already thinking about actually short-term tenancies might not work in that instance. We might have to think more longer term. So I think that's opportunities not just for current farmers, but also for new entrants coming in, because it gives them more stability. It gets them thinking beyond just that 5 year. And like Megan said, that I think for new entrants, it might be thinking differently. It might be looking beyond just primary production. It might be looking at value add. It might be looking at diversification projects, for example. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And there's always the possibilities of contract farming with the prospective young farmer going into partnership with a older farmer who wants to retire and gradually taking over more and more of the business. I mean, that's happening at the moment. I'm not very sure how often it's happening or how successful it is, but I'll just throw that tuppence halfpenny worth in. I won't ask for comment on that. Right, we on to the next question. Annie, have you got something?
Yes, and I'm really interested in this discussion because in my day job I'm a researcher, and actually I do quite a lot of work on new entrants to agriculture. So today's discussion is featuring in some of the work that we're doing in the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen, and I'm part of a European project that's looking at networking between farmers to share knowledge, and in Scotland specifically to look at how to share knowledge between new entrants to agriculture to overcome all the different challenges and to maximise the opportunities that Megan has mentioned and Jenna and Gavin have mentioned. And on the back of that, I wondered if we could get some free advice from the panel actually for Megan as she goes forward, because we've got two scientists and farm advisors on the panel. So I wanted to ask Jenna what kind of agri-tech or innovative solution she might recommend to a small-scale producer like Megan, and also what kind of advice Gavin would suggest to Megan for integrating ruminants into her system. So I'll leave those two there. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to take that one first? And maybe back to Gavin for the first go at this one. Okay, Gavin? Are you still there, Gavin?
I'm a bit worried that we may not have a Gavin, so we might have to go back to Jenna. He's just.
I don't think I've got much room for a cow. I think a cow can be quite disruptive, actually.
Well, I'll certainly take the agri-tech side. So one of the things I would say is, and it goes back to right back one of the very first questions, it's around demand. So I guess one of the first things I would put to Megan actually is really understanding what her challenges and what her priority areas are. And where she sees that maybe she's not getting the maximum out of her system. But I would imagine just from what we've discussed today already, I'd be thinking around the soil health focus and the benefits you're getting to make sure you're getting the maximum out of your soil, because that's the key component in all of this. How you can increase productivity, and that might be from a nutrient delivery perspective, but it might also be from a pest and disease perspective. And you know, Megan being quite small scale, you know, it depends how relevant she feels this might be, but it might be about how best to help monitor that, whether it is having remote sensing, you know, giving her the opportunity, whether she's on or off site, having access to that information and knowing that she has an infestation of something that's just come in or it's likely to come in the next few days, so that she can compare whatever treatment, whether it's a synthetic chemistry or biological, she's ready to go with that. And yeah, I think, as I say, to me, it's probably a piece about inputs, the right seeds that she's using. Is it the right variety that she's using for demand, for the climatic conditions? So yeah, I think there's a lot of different angles you could go in this, but ultimately there's lots of barriers to that as well. You know, for any tech costs money. So there's a piece there when we're working with farmers, it's understanding, are we developing the right tech for them? Is it something that they need? So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is what does Megan need in her system? But also, what can she afford to pay for this? And we're quite lucky, there is a real focus right now from the government to try and increase the uptake of technologies. So we've got the Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant right now to help break down those barriers of costs. And if I was starting from scratch and developing something for Megan, I would have Megan on board straight from the very beginning. You know, when I was speaking about my Slugbot project earlier on, one of the best benefits I found in any project is having a farmer or a grower involved right at the very beginning, to make sure that we're always developing something that's specifically for their needs. And it's not just, it's a great thing to have because I'm a scientist.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. Time is moving on. I see it's we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. Have we time for another question, Annie?
I'm not quite sure actually. I think we might have to wrap up because we have Mac in the background who's prompting us that things are going to move on with the technology. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to say thank you to the panel. Can I ask one of you to mute, I think, Jenna? And it's been a really fascinating discussion this afternoon. I always learn a lot, and I've been very grateful to Jenna, to Gavin and Megan for sharing their experience and the really vast knowledge, and just makes you feel proud to live in this area, that people have grown up locally, gone off and, you know, got all of this experience and come back and they're using it locally as well. And I hope it's an inspiration to all the other young folk who live in Thailand. And I'd also like to say a big thanks to you, Eddie. You might want to have some closing words, but it's been great to have your guidance and steering the helm of this discussion this afternoon, and I look forward to keeping in touch. So I'll leave you to close up. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Annie. That's been a fascinating discussion, which is seems to have passed very, very quickly. And I would only like to reiterate your thanks to our panel, and from the point of view of me chairing it, for being so kind and cooperative to the chairman. And I'm sure that the audience will have found it fascinating. And I hope I think you're going to write a little report on it, aren't you, Annie? Is that the plan? So that we can get the messages out to a wider audience. Thanks to the audience who are going to watch this, and thanks to the panel, and personally thank you to Annie for giving me the opportunity of taking part in it.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And we'll say goodbye and enjoy the rest of the festival, everybody who's watching. Thank you.